right.
One chair.
Sure.
Take one of these.
Yes.
The only possibly we could have
Well, so we
Jenna
could have
and
somebody-
John and Kelly. Kelly can sit right there. She won't care.
Okay. Oh, exactly.
Same family. Most people can't sit real close anyways.
No, people always take as much space as they can get.
Get workspace.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I should turn my video on. Back a little. There we go.
So are they gonna finish tonight, you said?
I think they're gonna try it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be great. Is the carpet done?
What?
Is the carpet finished?
Yeah, that's what you said, that they're gonna finish tonight.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think the carpet's done. I don't know about the transition.
Okay.
And
Wow.
replacing carpet. Or
Anybody there?
replacing.
Hello, hello.
Good
Can you
morning.
hear?
Hello.
Hello? Can you hear us?
Hey.
Oh, good. Glad you can join us. Although everything's gone faster than anticipated. The tree's already down and cut into sections. And they might finish the carpet and the flooring tonight.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
We stopped by church and just saw they had the trunk all cut into logs already.
Yep.
And don't forget, the drinking fountain got put in too,
Wow.
And where is that? At school?
the upper level,
That's cool.
at school, yeah.
Oh, wow, that's nice.
It's the bottle filler type.
Oh, yeah.
I had 29 years under that old tree, Jake.
You don't look a day older.
Every recess. Uh-oh, where'd he go?
Oh, no, it's still there.
Oh, there we go.
I just got everything up on time for a change.
Jacob saved a section of that tree to count the rings with his class.
Oh, cool.
So I'm guessing it's gonna be around 80, but we'll see when he gets the final count.
We have to have him count back to 1982.
You have a handout and a Bible? The Bible's over there.
Do you remember that tree when you arrived?
There's a giant swing set under it.
There were two trees,
2 trees, yeah.
Boy, I don't remember that.
two
Huh.
trees and a swing set in between. That's how times have changed.
I've heard that there were two at one point.
It wasn't too long ago, they took one about 3-4 years.
The one they would have.
One was left.
Something else.
There we go.
They took some perimeter trees. I'm not
Yeah.
sure what else.
Did I tell you about the trees in my yard? That there were two trees in my yard, and just in the year of the great windstorm, they fell over on my neighbor's house.
Oh,
Well, before we were there, but yeah, in our yard.
oh, where you were there.
Yeah. But I've heard about it so many times from my neighbor.
Oh, yeah.
It was, well, no, I think at first it was almost like he kind of transferred the blame, but as time went on and he realized I accepted his anti-tree attitude,
Oh,
he realizes I'm not, I share no fault. But one of the first things he wanted to do is cut down a tree that was like bordering our property. But after I heard that story, I understood. He just hates trees. He cut down all the trees in his yard. Well, and that's not the only thing that happened. First, a couple of years before that, a tree fell into his backyard and destroyed his fence. And then another one fell on his house. So, yeah. So he hates ponderosa pines. I mean, if you want to hear him talk for 20 minutes, just say, what do you think about those ponderosa pine trees? That'll be it.
don't get in here.
Yeah. If we start to get loopy, there's a bit of a chemical smell. So if I start to just seem like I'm enjoying myself too much, or my thoughts make less sense than normal.
Oh, from the new flooring?
The paint, right?
From the paint.
And the flooring, yeah, and all the adhesive materials.
Take the door up here. Did you come down from? No, he didn't.
I came,
Yeah, no way.
I went to my office.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Close the door upstairs then?
I may have forgotten that.
Let me check that. Oh, no.
Leslie's joining us this week. She came late last week, some of you may have noticed, and it's here. We got the Bardens. We don't have Jenna and John, but they may be with us in a few minutes. Kelly said she was thinking about coming in person.
Your dog was fun this morning.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, let's see, what before we get going, just things to report. There was the funeral for Don Carstead today. Some of you know him. He was the first member over at the Vine, and it was a nice service. I think about as good as a funeral can be. The last time I was there at the Vine, he had a prayer request, and I called, and they do it live there, so I called on him, and he prayed. He said, "Pray that he could go home to heaven soon, because he had nothing left to live for." What do you say to that? You know, and apparently he's done that several times. So
Well, he missed
he's
his
where he
wife.
wants to be. You know, I mean, it's hard not to celebrate that he's finally got his wish and he's with his wife again. And he had a long, very productive life and did a lot of great things and had a strong faith. So
Shows that it's Lord will.
yeah, well, you know, it's kind of when you do make a prayer request like that, I think it makes it easier on everyone else when you do pass away. I mean, maybe he was partly thinking of that because,
Yeah.
you know, you
I think
you miss the person, but you know it's what they wanted, and you're totally confident that they're in heaven. So that was Lance and I went this morning, and then we'll maybe say a prayer in a moment here for Alex Diaz. Alex Diaz has had appendicitis, and he had an emergency appendectomy last night, and he's recovering in the hospital.
And it burst, right?
You just said.
Yeah, it had burst, and it had burst pretty bad.
Everybody goes to heaven is together.
Poor guy, he must have been in so much pain.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, the doctor said it looked like it had ruptured a day or two before he started complaining to his parents.
Oh, dear.
So, in fact, we calculated it very well may have ruptured at our house on Sunday, jumping on the trampoline, perhaps. So,
He's a tough little kid.
yeah, he didn't complain much. It's my fault.
I think once it bursts, it doesn't hurt as much.
Oh, that's almost more dangerous.
Once it's burst.
Yeah. Huh.
I'm not, don't quote me.
Okay.
I had it,
and I
and
was in so much pain, I couldn't walk.
Me
My dad
too.
carried
me
to
too,
the
but
hospital.
mine almost burst too, but it hadn't burst.
Yeah.
It was like, it was just,
I was probably
Right.
about his age.
Hmm.
it was about 50 something.
Yeah. So it's a memorable time in a person's life, especially if it
Yes.
happens as a kid. And then, and then the Tripp family, they seem to have COVID.
That's great.
Say
They
what?
work together, all remote.
Yeah, not all of them. So, but Albert and Christina and Siri.
Have it now?
Oh,
Well, the only one who tested positive is Christina, but the others have the symptoms and didn't get the results back
We
yet.
were
So,
with Al on Sunday, you know.
Asthma problems.
yeah, he has asthma and stuff. So it's a little more serious for him, even though he's younger.
Al,
Yeah, he has some asthma and some heart issues that.
Simon has asthma. He's the one in our house that didn't get it.
oh.
Yeah, I don't know how that works, but. Oh, hello, guys. We're right about to begin in prayer. So, Jenna and John are here. Oh, yeah, the tree is there as a distraction to test you. And you failed. It kind of passed. You did come in eventually.
Well, we had to work around.
Yes. Well, we're gonna pray, and you know about Alex Diaz.
I was there last night.
Oh, you were there. Okay, good. She knows. Well, we'll pray and we'll begin. Dear Lord, we thank you for this chance to study your word and to look at the words of Job. Bless us through this. Help us to deal with the struggles that come into our life and the questions and the doubts that we face. Friends who don't understand us, problems that we don't understand, things that you allow to come into our life that we can't see a reason for. and help us turn all those things over to you in trust and faith. And when we do step out of line and say or think things that we shouldn't think, bring us back as you brought Job back to our faith, so that we repent of that and continue to trust in you always. We also ask you to bless Alex Diaz and his recovery, and the Tripp family as they recover from COVID. Help them to have continue with just the mild symptoms they have, and to get over this soon without any major complications, and to not spread it further. In Jesus' name we ask that. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so I got two introductory questions here. The first one is, last week we read Job's longest response, chapters 12 to 14. We saw him vacillate, go back and forth between despair and anger and hope. Just as a review, what were some high points and low points? Does anything at all stick out? Kind of get it back in our minds.
Versus again.
That's chapters 12, 13, and 14. Yeah. Maybe just skim back over it to get into it, and see if you strike anything that you particularly remember.
Well, I think the low point is
Why is this not
is
scrolling?
Zophar.
Oh, it says talking David Sauer, but I didn't hear anything.
Hi,
Were you perhaps just breathing heavily?
I was.
I don't know. I'm not able to scroll, so I'm reopening the,
Okay.
well, this is odd.
He was complaining about maybe God was revisiting his sins from his youth.
One thing, yeah, is God revisiting my sins from my youth? That's something we saw last week. There we go, I can scroll again. Anything else you recall? Or do you maybe remember the little bit of hope that he had? The verse I was thinking of is chapter 14, 15, and chapter 14, verse 15 and 16. You will call and I will answer you. You will long for the creature you have made. Surely then you will count my steps, but not keep track of my sin. My offenses will be sealed up in a bag. You will cover over my sin. So he had the false idea that he was being held accountable for his sin, and that's why he was suffering. But yet he holds out this hope that perhaps God will one day forgive all his sin. So he thinks maybe this won't last forever. So he's going back and forth. Sometimes he says he has no hope, then he says he has hope. And we'll see that again today. Now we skipped chapters 15, 16, and 17. And I found that Eliphaz really doesn't ever say anything new, which is kind of interesting in of itself, as this being a real conversation, because that can't happen, where someone just keeps making the same point. And then Job's speech there in 16 and 17 is pretty much all the same stuff. He's been suffering. He's in a lot of pain. It's very good imagery. It's very dramatic, but I thought this would be chapters that we could skip. But did anyone read them and have comments or questions?
We went through them tonight, and there was
Yeah.
something that kind of made me chuckle, I guess, to myself. He said, his insults are very good,
Yeah,
It tells you that you keep on speaking. Just-
yeah. What ails you that you keep on speaking? So each time they answer, they say something like, why do you even bother? Just stop talking, but can't help themselves. I don't know. I can imagine people fighting and saying, shut up, but yet they keep talking.
But they're not just saying, shut up.
Yeah. It's more than that. You're right. Yeah. Let's see. Anything else from these chapters that we skipped? I'll just point out chapter 16, verses 20 and 21. Or no, 19, 20, 21. Chapter 16, 19. Even now my witness is in heaven, my advocate is on high. My intercessor is my friend. As my eyes pour out tears to God, on behalf of a man, he pleads with God as one pleads for a friend. So he talks about having an intercessor in heaven and has hope that he'll be heard, which is strange because, other times he said he has no hope, as we've seen before. But now we're gonna do another quick read through Bildad, and we'll start out just looking at the beginning of his response and then read a big chunk of it all at one time. So let's, any volunteer to read Job 18 verses 1 through 4? Thank you,
I'll do
Derek.
it if you can hear me.
Most.
Job 18, verses 1 to 4.
Somebody
And
else.
Bildad the Shuhite replied, when will you end these speeches? Be sensible, and then we can talk. Why are we regarded as cattle and considered stupid in your sight? You who tear yourself to pieces in our anger. Is the earth to be abandoned for your sakes? Or must the rocks be moved from their place?
Yeah, and for the most part, you can't tell unless you just read it, but he's missing Job's argument. He's no longer addressing the things Job said. For instance, Job doesn't say they're stupid. Job says that they're not helpful, that they're not wise. There's a little bit of a difference. But all that being said, however, what is Bildad's accusation at the end of verse 4? Can you tell what he's hinting at? What is he saying that Job is doing in all his argument that he's righteous? That's true with verse 2. You could say he's talking down to them. But how about verse 4? Is the earth to be abandoned for your sake, or must the rocks be moved from their place? Why does he say that? What is causing the earth to be abandoned? Yeah, that's kind of it. Does the whole universe revolve around you? And not only that, but everybody knows how things work. Everybody knows when people get punished and how God deals with sin. And are we going to rewrite all of theology and everything we know because you think that your experience doesn't match it? That's kind of what he's saying. So, you can protest all you want that you're innocent, but if you're innocent, then that blows apart our whole worldview. And that can't happen. So that's kind of the point here. And then he just goes into, and Eliphaz had done this before, talking about the wicked and how God definitely always punishes the wicked. And the whole chapter is really just that. And it's interesting how Job's friends move more and more and more to just arguing this point and kind of ignoring everything else. So now we'll go ahead and just read it fairly quickly. Anybody want to read a little bit longer section that we probably don't have to talk about a ton, and it's all about what will happen to the wicked. Uh-oh, we got two here, John and Lance. But, all right, we'll go for John. And by the way, while he's reading, kind of list the different things that he says will happen to the wicked. And you can write it down or you can take a little mental note.
Indeed, the light of the wicked goes out, and the flame of his fire gives no light. The light in his tent is darkened, and his lamp goes out above him. His vigorous stride is shortened, and his own scheme brings him down. For he is thrown into the net by his own feet, and he steps on the web. A snare seizes him by the heel, and a trap snaps shut. A noose for him is hidden in the ground, and a trap for him on the path. All around, terror is frightening him, carry him at every step. His strength is famished, and calamity is ready at his side. His skin is devoured by disease. The firstborn of death devours his limbs. He is torn from the security of his tent, and they march him before the king of terrors. There dwells in his tent nothing of his. Brimstone is scattered on his habitation. His roots are dried below, and his branches cut off above. Memory of him perishes from the earth, and he has no name abroad. He is driven from light into darkness, and chased from the inhabited world. He has no offspring or posterity among his people, nor any survivor where he is sojourned. Those in the west are appalled at his fate, and those in the east are seized hard. Surely such are the dwellings of the wicked, and this is the place of him who does not know God.
Yeah. So what's it like for the wicked according to Bildad here?
Darkness, and he's erased. Every trace of it, no, not even family or descendants.
Yeah, no trace whatsoever, totally dark. Anything else? That's why his roots dry up and his branches wither. That means his whole history, his whole posterity, it's gone. Just like that tree out there. It's already, the stump's ground and everything. Just no trace. Yeah, anything else that strikes you as kind of strong language?
lot of those, it's like the noose around, the traps and the snares are all gonna get you.
Yeah, he's just surrounded by traps and snares on every side, constantly startled by terrors. I mean, it doesn't really sound like the wicked people have any good at all in their life. It sounds like it's just from bad to worse to nothing. And before we even see Job's response, I mean, can anyone think of a contrary point that could call this into question? Yeah, I mean, that this is true. Is there anything that would kind of disprove what Bildad is saying? That the wicked.
Oh, yeah, you see wicked people prospering all the time.
Yeah, exactly. They're wicked people tend to do really well. And Job's going to argue that when we get to chapter 21. But he doesn't take it up yet in chapter 19. I mean, just think of all the wicked dictators and emperors, and those are just famous examples. You know, there's many, many examples on smaller scale too, who are rich and famous and flaunt their evil and oppress people who oppose them. So, yeah, it doesn't seem like an argument that's easy to maintain. But notice it really doesn't have much to do with what Job said. And when Job responds, he's not really going to address it yet. And so they're talking past each other. And that's what kind of makes this hard to read, because you're trying to figure out the connection. And there isn't a strong connection. But again, that's kind of like a real conversation. When you get people who have two different opinions and they're kind of coming from different places, they may continue to talk past each other. And rather than really engage, they just kind of repeat their own point of view. So now we're going to look at chapter 19, which is much more important and meaty. And it's probably the most famous chapter of Job, because it's used at a lot of funerals. And because we're going to see, this is where he says, I know that my Redeemer lives. And we'll look at that in great detail. But first, let's see how he gets there. And he starts out with sort of a typical response to his friends with, you know, the banter back and forth and the insulting them. But we'll still read that. Job 19, 1-6. Anybody online? We've only had in-person readers so far.
I can try it if the audio comes through.
To raise your hand.
I can try it if the audio works.
It looks like Jake might be.
I can.
See his mouth
Is
moving.
my audio
But I can't hear
okay?
you. Maybe you have
Yeah,
no
the
sound.
audio is working.
Sadly, Jake,
Yeah.
I can't hear you. It's clear you're
I'm
talking.
not on mute.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
I can.
All right. Jim and David volunteered at the same time. First, we'll have Dave Sauer. Then later we'll have Jim.
Okay, first.
Oh, but
can you
Dave, you're
hear-
quiet too.
Can you hear me?
I must have done this.
Hello?
I did this.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Yeah, hold on. That's not you, that's me.
You're both coming through loud and clear.
There, you're back. I don't know.
Am I there?
Okay. Thank you, Dave. Yes.
Hello?
Maybe you could all hear Jake, but I couldn't. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Then
I
Job,
yield my time.
who's reading?
And now it's Dave, then we'll go Jim, and then we'll get back to Jake.
All right, Dave. Then Job replied, how long will you torment me and crush me with words? 10 times now you have reproached me and shamelessly attacked me. If it is true that I have gone astray, my error remains my concern alone. If indeed you would exalt yourself above me and use my humiliation against me, then know that God has wronged me and drawn his net around me.
Okay. And this is pretty typical stuff that Job would say, so we maybe don't have to dwell on it. But look, one verse in there that's kind of unique. If it is true I've gone astray, my error remains my concern alone. In other words, why are you so upset? If I am wrong, what's it hurting you? You know, why do you have to attack me for it? Can't you just kind of let it slide? Instead, they feel the need to gang up on him. But now we get 19:7-12. I really like this section because he starts to details about his misery. And it's really very miserable. And some of the stuff that's happened. First with some metaphors and then with some specific examples. So I think I said, Jim, would you mind reading 7-12?
Though I cry violence, I get no response. Though I call for help, there is no justice. He has blocked my way so I cannot pass. He has shrouded my paths in darkness. He has stripped me of my honor and removed the crown from my head. He tears me down on every side till I am gone. He uproots me. He uproots my hope like a tree. His anger burns against me. He counts me among his enemies. His troops advance in force. They build a siege ramp against me and encamp around my tent.
All right, so I had two questions. He touches on some of the less obvious things he is suffering. Can you name some of them? Aspects of Job's suffering that we hadn't really thought of before.
But he's listening when I ask for help.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one's there when he asks for help, whether it be God or other people. How helpless you must feel in that situation. Yeah, anything else?
He has no honor.
Yeah, verse 9. And he's going to elaborate on that point, especially in chapter 30. And he used to have a lot of honor. He used to be like the most honored guy. So that's got to be painful. Anything else?
Taking away his hope.
Yeah, God took away his hope. And we can't conceive of God taking away our hope because of Christ. But to him, all this disfavor, all this negative stuff happening meant God no longer loved him and cared for him. In his own mind, that's what it meant. It's not actually what it meant. And so he felt like he had no hope. And, you know, we can feel that way if a lot of stuff goes bad or if something big goes bad in our lives too. So, yeah. And why does Job select the metaphors that he does? Did any of these metaphors stick out at you?
The siege mentality of being under pressure all the time, like the ramps that are up against the castle wall and so forth.
Yeah, that conveys, like you said, a siege mentality of just constantly defensive, constantly under attack. And it tears me down on every side. So he's really picturing God as like an enemy army here. All right, Jake, and as long as you're speaking, let's continue with 13 to 20, because this continues his lament, and it's pretty moving.
He has alienated my brothers from me. My acquaintances are completely estranged from me. My kinsmen have gone away. My friends have forgotten me. My guests and my maidservants count me a stranger. They look upon me as an alien. I summon my servant, but he does not answer. Though I beg him with my own mouth, my breath is offensive to my wife. I am loathsome to my own brothers. Even the little boys scorn me. When I appear, they ridicule me. All my intimate friends detest me. Those I love have turned against me. I am nothing but skin and bones. I have escaped only with the skin of my teeth. I have pity on...
Let's go to 22. Sure, yeah.
Okay. Have pity on me, my friends. Have pity, for the hand of God has struck me. Why do you pursue me as God does? Will you never get enough of my flesh?
Yeah. So what do all those examples, oh, and I'm going to mute you, Jake, because you're just getting feedback. But what do all those examples have in common? From 13 to 19, I should say. Yeah, he just lists all the people who should be there for him, and they're not. Family, acquaintances, close friends, relatives, guests, meaning people who stayed at his house when they were traveling through, servants, his own wife. Yeah, little kids. What's that, Sandy?
It's like he's hit rock bottom. Can't
Yeah.
get any worse.
Yeah, he's hit rock bottom, except for usually that it's kind of like we think of somebody on drugs or something, you know, doing it to themselves to some degree, but this has totally happened to him from the outside.
Okay, so lost hope, is that a better way to say it?
No, it's not a correction. I'm just pointing out usually this is something you think of as like person's made bad decisions or something, and it forces them to confront some problem when we say hit rock bottom. And he's at that point, I mean, I'm agreeing with you, but then he's got nothing to do to change. You know, it's not like he can turn his life around. He can't just you know, go to AA or decide he's going to change the way he treats people, because this is all done to him. So just emphasizing how frustrating and hopeless it would be.
So here's my question.
Yeah.
If he is feeling like this, and we turn the page and we get to verse 25. Where does he get that strength to say what he does?
Yeah. It's a good question. Why don't we'll get there and then we'll discuss it more. But you're right. I mean, he's going to go from this to those famous words.
To the highest.
Funerals. So it's going to be an incredible dramatic turnaround. Maybe one more, and that's even what I have there is question number 7. Like, what would you expect to come next? You would expect something even worse, maybe. And instead we get this reversal. The other thing, though, just pointing out, by the skin of my teeth, this is actually the origin, or I should say the earliest recorded use of that phrase. It's one of those that actually comes from the Bible. And it's possible it was a common idiom at that time, but it's where we get it from.
Turn them up a little.
Turn them up? Yeah, sorry. Okay. Hey, could some of you speak just to test your volume?
Hello?
Hello.
Good morning.
Okay. Yeah, there, it's better. All right, now we'll get to, and 21 to 22, how does this appeal strike you? You know, have pity on me, have pity. I mean, does anybody read that and not have some pity for Job?
I've been crying all afternoon.
Really?
Yeah.
Just reading?
Horrible.
It is, yeah, okay, good. Well, I'm glad it's affected you. It is, it's a good book, yeah. So it is sad. And the worst part for him is that he was this faithful guy, and now he feels like God was his best friend and God's turned on him. So in that sense, it's kind of like a picture of Christ, except for Christ knew what was happening and embraced it. And God actually did turn on Christ. Here, he only sort of gave that impression. All right, so now the verses 23 to 27, this famous part that we read at funerals, and justifiably so. Anybody want to read? Let's see who. I got all 3 of you guys who had volunteered. Lance and John had volunteered, and we called on John. So Lance, you want to take it?
23 to 27.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron scroll on lead, or engraved in rock forever. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see with my own eye, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. If you say, how we will pound him, since the root of the trouble lies in him, and you should fear the sword yourselves, for the wrath will bring punishment by the sword. And then you will know that there is just judgment.
Yeah. So notice, preceded by this lack of hope and expression of misery, and followed by this angry thing against his friends. But in the middle, this amazing hope. So 23 and 24, those 2 verses basically say he wishes his words would be recorded for all time. And after we look at the next part, we'll ask, why does he want that? What is it that would benefit him if his words were recorded for all time? I mean, if his concern is just, is he going to die and go to heaven? I mean, it doesn't matter if his words are written. So why exactly does he want this written down? But then on your handout, I've actually, these words are much argued about. You know, because the idea that the Old Testament, some people would have a hope of a resurrection, that's anathema to a lot of people. So they try to find other ways to understand this. And the Hebrew it's not, most of it's clear, but there's a couple ambiguities. So I've written a kind of literal translation of the Hebrew, which I don't usually do, but I think it's worth doing here. So verse 25, he says very literally, I know that my Redeemer is alive. They don't use the verb is in a context like this. The word redeemer, anybody know what's a typical, what are some of the overtones of a redeemer?
They buy you.
Yeah, so if you've been sold into slavery, they'll buy you out. That's one of the main things. And that's why God's the redeemer of Egypt or of Israel, because he buys them out of slavery, so to speak. Or anything else a redeemer would do?
Pay whatever price to get you back.
Yeah. So pay whatever price.
That cares for you.
Yeah. And
Boaz.
yeah, like Ruth and Boaz. Boaz becomes the kinsman redeemer. He's actually not the closest, but he has the closest guy say he doesn't want to deal with Ruth, and then he takes over. So it can be more generally the person who sees after your affairs. And that could be what it is here. In what sense does he mean God is his redeemer on this? But let's look at the rest of it. And afterwards, and it's either upon or over dust, he will rise. So what is that? Usually that's understood as the dust of Job's body. Notice he will stand upon the earth is kind of standard, but I bet you have a footnote. Oh, or over my grave. That's interesting because the word grave is not there. But I think they want to be clear that that's how they're interpreting it. It's not just saying he will stand upon the earth in general, but the word dust is like ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Humans are made from dust. To dust you shall return. It's the same word used in Genesis. So he seems to be talking about Job's dead body, basically, decomposed dead body. And after or afterwards,
See if it was me good.
after my flesh is stripped off, or that's actually a word that can also mean flayed, like the torturing. So I think it means after he's dead, though, or like you do for an animal or something. After my flesh has been totally stripped off my body, and they translate it here, yet, probably. The word is just and, so it can mean a lot of things. From my flesh, I will see God. The only reason that is at all ambiguous is that the word from in Hebrew can also mean apart from. And so he's either saying, I will see God from my flesh, meaning I will, even after my flesh has been stripped, I will somehow again be in my flesh and I will see God. Or it could be saying in Hebrew, after my flesh has been stripped, apart from my flesh, I will see God, meaning I will see him in some sort of spiritual way. So either one, it's either talking about the resurrection, seeing God from your body, or it's talking about how when we die, our soul immediately goes into God's presence. And it's talking about that. Both of those are possible ways to understand the second half of the verse. But either way, it's clear he's saying that after he's dead, he will see God with his own eyes, because the next verse 27, there's really nothing vague about it, which I will look at for myself. And my eyes look at it and not another. I'm just taking out the words they've filled in the translations. The one part that's a little different, literally it's saying, my kidneys are worn out inside me. And when it says how my heart yearns within me, I think that's probably not the best way to translate it. He's more saying that he's emotionally spent thinking about it. I mean, I can see why they'd say how my heart yearns within me. Certainly makes a better translation for a funeral. But really what he's saying is I'm emotionally drained, because the kidneys are in the Bible, actually, the heart, when the word heart, like this part of your body, in their mind, this was the brain. This was the source of thinking, and the kidneys were the source of emotion. And it gets real confusing the way it's translated, because half the time when they translate heart, the word heart, they keep it as heart. So when the Bible's talking about your brain, half the time we translate it as your heart and we think it's emotional. So anyway, that kind of gets a bit complicated. But for the point here, my kidneys are worn out inside me. He's emotionally drained. So then looking at that, we've gone through it in kind of detail. Any questions on what I wrote there? On what the meaning is? The reason people still take it as a resurrection would be, well, he's standing on the dust. There seems to be an emphasis on Job's body is gone, and yet he's seeing him with his own eyes in his own body. So that kind of works. If you were to take it as it's just his soul seeing him, why does he say my own eyes will look at him? Well, maybe eyes are a metaphor, and he doesn't mean his literal eyes. He just means somehow his soul will look at him. So it's a little bit ambiguous, but only on the point, is it right when you die, or is it the resurrection that's being looked forward to? It's very clear it's talking about seeing God after death. So what is his basic hope then?
I'm sorry.
Death is not going to be the end of it. We'll see his heart.
Yeah, death is not the end. He will see God.
Yeah, he will see God.
Anything else you would, anyone would add? I mean, I'm not saying you should necessarily, just didn't want to skip anybody. I think that's basically it. But then the question 9, why did Job want this written down and recorded for all time? And maybe these aren't the words even. I mean, I guess we could have asked that. When he says, oh, that my words were written down and recorded, maybe he doesn't just mean this. Maybe he means all of his words. Now, if that were true, actually, ironic, he got his wish, right? I mean, that's kind of a neat little detail. He probably didn't actually think that would happen.
Careful what you say for it.
Yeah. But why does he want this recorded? If he knows he's going to die and see God, why does he wish his words were written down? So,
Well, it's because he's human and he wants to say a little bit and then add to it.
yeah, exactly. It's for his friends and everybody else, which he had just talked about, right? I mean, this explanation makes sense in context, and that's always the best answer. Everybody has abandoned him. Everybody thinks that he's a terrible sinner and wants nothing to do with him now.
Even all of y'all.
Yeah, and he wishes that his words would be recorded so that after he dies, he could be proved right somehow. You know, that his words would stand, and one day he could show them. So what's really bothering him isn't that he thinks he's going to die and go to hell. It's that his reputation's been ruined. And that's what mattered so much to him. And his life now is so miserable. So he doesn't need it recorded for his own sake. He doesn't need it recorded for God's sake. He needs it recorded for his reputation's sake. And his reputation, we just saw him talk about it, and it's going to become more and more central as Job speaks about himself. And as I've previewed a few times, his very last statement is 3 chapters of him just talking about himself. And you kind of see how pride starts to rear its head. All right, well, you already read 28 to 29. And so his final warning to his friends, we should note he's warned his friends several times, and his warnings turn out to be true. So of all the people who speak, he probably is the most correct, except perhaps maybe Elihu. I could swear I had a Bible. Oh, yeah, there it is. Sorry. I closed it and put it away. And what do you think about Job 19, 28 and 29, though? His warning against his friends. Oh, that's Psalm, not Job. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Judge not lest you be judged.
What goes around comes around.
Yeah, there you go.
You're going to find out what the truth is.
Yep, exactly. So, and that also fits with our interpretation of why does he want this written down? You know, his desire is that he'd be proven right, even if it has to happen after he dies. So, and that's when we preach about this in a funeral, you kind of have to ignore that context. Usually it doesn't have that much to do with what you're there to celebrate. But it's kind of interesting to know that Job isn't saying this so much to show off his faith, but to say, look, I know I'm going to be vindicated, but I just wish you guys could see it. You know, that's really the thing that gets him. But it's the resurrection we focus on, of course, at a funeral, or at least the afterlife or the resurrection. All right. Any other thoughts or comments there? Well, let's see. We already read one chapter about the fate of the wicked. So with chapter 20, rather than sit here and read it, the whole chapter is just, it's not exactly the same as Bildad, but it's very similar. So maybe for a little bit different exercise, why don't you just skim over it and see, does Zophar say anything different about the fate of the wicked? Or is he pretty much saying the same thing as what Bildad said and really what Eliphaz said before him? Just take like a minute to do that. Bildad said basically everything was miserable for the wicked.
On top of that, you're not gonna enjoy the good. Not only is it gonna be bad, you're not gonna enjoy it. No streams of free or anything for you.
Yep. Nothing good for the wicked at all.
It was interesting that he brings up pride. And maybe his friends think that Job had too much pride, that nothing could happen to him.
Yeah. Yeah, that the ancients recognized pride as the center of all sin and the source of all sin. And he sees it in his friends and his friends see it in him. And that's kind of how pride is too, by the way. It's easy to see in somebody else. It's harder to see in ourselves. Yeah. Anything else you see that sticks out? I mean, I guess my thought was it's more or less the same type of idea. Different details, different imagery, but verse 28, total darkness lies in wait for his treasures. A fire unfanned will consume him and devour what is left in his tent. 28, a flood will carry off his house, rushing waters on the day of God's wrath. So they're saying that he has no hope. One slight shade is that Zophar allows for perhaps like a brief, very, very brief moment of not complete misery, a moment of happiness, but it's so quickly taken away. But other verses really sound like nothing good at all. Who was saying something there? Or maybe it was nobody. And I think what I'll do, because I don't want to go too much past time, is I'm just going to point out some of the highlights of chapter 21. Because what happens now is Job, I could save this for next time, but I think it'd be better to advance. So just follow me through some of the highlights of this book chapter. So now Job decides he's going to answer their talking about the wicked. It's like he's tired of hearing it, and he has some pretty good comebacks. So let's look at this starting chapter 21, verse 7. His first point is, why do the wicked live on, growing old and increasing in power? They see their children established around them, their offspring before their eyes. Their homes are safe and free from fear. The rod of God is not on them. And he goes on to say how good it is for the wicked. Verse 13, they spend their years in prosperity and go down to the grave in peace. Yet they say to God, leave us alone. We have what we know, no desire to know your ways. Who is the Almighty that we should serve him? What would we gain by praying to him? And so that's, I think, a much more honest answer. That's pretty much like what Anna said earlier. I mean, we see all sorts of wicked people having great lives and having wonderful children and blessing their children with a wonderful inheritance. And so what's it's ridiculous to say that wicked people never suffer. And verse 17, how often is the lamp of the wicked snuffed out? How often does calamity come upon them? The fate God allots in his anger. Not very often. Occasionally, yeah, of course you can point to somebody who's wicked, who had this terrible downfall, like Hitler. But you can also point out Stalin, who lived, I don't know how old he lived, but I don't believe he was ever assassinated, right? He just died of old age. Yeah, in his sleep, peacefully, after murdering tens of millions. So Hitler doesn't disprove Stalin, or Mao. And again, that's just to pick the very famous, obvious examples. Verse 19, it is said, God stores up the punishment of the wicked for their children. Let him repay the wicked so that they themselves will experience. So in other words, if God punishes their children, but not them, that's not punishing them. Don't use that argument, he's saying. 21, for what do they care about the families they leave behind when their allotted months come to an end? And so in verse 23, he says, one person dies in full vigor, completely secure and at ease, well nourished in body, bones rich with marrow. Another dies in bitterness of soul, never having enjoyed anything good. Side by side, they lie in the dust, and worms cover them both. So, I mean, it's true. Yeah. It's certainly not where we want to dwell as Christians, but there's some truth to it. Where you're born, who your parents are, makes a huge difference in what kind of life you're going to have. And it doesn't always seem fair why some good person is born to some poor or abusive family and why some rascal's born to wealth, So Job's being honest, and God is not ever going to criticize him for these kind of things. It's only his pride when he says that God was being unfair to him. Let's see. And then verse 27. I know full well what you are thinking, the schemes by which you would wrong me. You say, where now is the house of the great, the tents where the wicked live? In other words, I think he's saying, I know that you're saying all this stuff about the wicked because you think that I'm the wicked. I know that, let's put it on the table. However, 29, have you never questioned those who travel? I kind of like this verse. They didn't have Google. So if they wanted to know what it was like over in Iran or somewhere far away, they had to talk to somebody who was on the road and has been to those places. That's why people like Marco Polo even later would write down what they saw, because that's the only way to learn about that kind of stuff. So I kind of like that, the historical background there. But have you never questioned those who travel? Have you paid no regard to their accounts? That the wicked are spared from the day of calamity, that they're delivered from the day of wrath. So don't tell me they succeed. Everybody knows it. Just ask around. It's not a secret. And then, some things to that effect. But then 34, so how can you console me with your nonsense? Nothing is left of your answers but falsehood. So we have to say on this particular issue, I guess he's won the point, yet there's a lot that isn't said as well. And his attitude doesn't seem to be one of sort of piety, but almost relishing this discovery that God doesn't use the rule of karma like they thought he should. So it's not a high point really to end. It's kind of a bummer, but at least we got to say he wins the argument. Any thoughts on this chapter? We went through it rather quickly. But I'd rather go quickly and finish the whole book within memory and see how it all fits together than spend all day on just a few verses. So next time we're going to skip chapter 22 because Eliphaz basically doesn't have anything new to say. But if you want to read the whole book, so that's your homework. Read 22. You can come in next time and ask any questions or make any comments. And then I think we'll focus on Job's reply in 23 and 24. And you can look, you have Bibles you're looking at, but notice chapter 25 there is very short. And so we might read it, but of course it doesn't take long. And then we'll get into probably 26 as well, because now Job starts to, the dialogue had been a bit repetitive, and that's why we cut some of it out, but now it's actually going some new directions. And 27 and 28 are really good. So we'll probably read most of the rest of it, but notice, except for 2 chapters, everything from here to chapter 31 is all Job talking. So really the friends don't get as much airtime as you'd think. You know, if you were to add it up, Job talks probably twice as much as all of them put together.
Got the name on it.
Yeah, it's his book, exactly. And he got his wish. His words were recorded, and we're reading it 2,000 years later. So keep that in mind, I guess, that God answers prayer. You know, we already prayed once, but just pray blessings on your evening and go pray for something, and God will hear you in Christ. What's that? Yeah, there's a lot of questions about that. I mean, it could have been many different people, and it doesn't give you a hint. My theory is that it would be maybe one of the Israelites, such as the children of Joseph. I doubt that before Joseph's time, any of them could read or write, because the alphabet wasn't even invented until around 2000 BC. So that's just a guess, you know. Elihu, who we'll see in a couple weeks, he may have been related to, I believe, some Edomites. I got to double check that. Now I can't remember. I don't think it was Israelites, I think it was Edomites or Ishmaelites. I got to go back and double check. So anyway, there could have been some distant family connections, and that's how this ended up in the Israelite sphere. Because it is fascinating. There's no Israelites in this book. It's the only book in the Old Testament, except for also maybe Ecclesiastes, and I think that would be all. And even that mentions Solomon. So, you know, I think it's the only one where it has nothing to do with Israel. So it is a mystery how to get in there. Yeah.
Do you need?
No,
Any other comments or questions, though, as we close up?
So I did notice a couple of references in 19 and 20.
Yeah.
That I think actually support the antediluvian theory for Job's lifetime. Because it mentions, you know, iron stylus engraving on lead, and weapons made of iron.
Yeah.
And in Abraham's time, Abraham was Bronze Age.
Yeah.
And the only references we have to, like, you know, iron metalworking.
Yeah.
Is Tubal came back in, you know, the genealogy from Adam to Noah.
Oh, yeah.
And post-flood, humankind did not have iron metallurgy until.
Yeah, I'll summarize in a sec.
Yeah, like that was lost technology for a long time. Here Joe just talking about it like it's commonly available stuff. Like, oh, what do you use to engrave lead? Oh, it's iron, of course. And what kind of weapons? You know, iron weapons.
Yeah.
Bronze bows. Like, oh, yeah. They had bronze steel, and Alexander the Greek conquered half the world using bronze spears.
Yeah.
And you know, the Roman legions, because, you know, partially because of their iron tech, were able to, you know, roll up everything else behind them. But for a large period of history, like much of the Old Testament, bronze was the best metal they had. So that I hadn't even realized that before, but then just realized,
Oh, so he's arguing that maybe this idea that it's antediluvian, meaning before the flood, is borne out by his mention of iron, basically.
Yeah, because for the vast majority of the Old Testament, iron was not a thing people used.
Yeah. The only thing I'd want to double check is I think I remember hearing once that it's not like they didn't have any iron, they just didn't have an abundant supply of it. But I don't know if that's, I don't remember where I heard that or if I'm just making that up or what, but
Where do you get iron? That's important.
you have to combine copper and tin?
No, iron is out. Iron is.
So that's bronze.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. It is its own. Yeah. Fe or whatever. Yeah.
Bronze. Wait, that's.
Well, we'll continue talking about iron here, but to everybody online, probably listening to a discussion of iron you can barely hear isn't the most fruitful thing. So thank you for sticking around, but blessings on your evening and thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Yeah, appreciate it.
Good night.
Have a good one. Yeah, so back to the iron and the